Hey, this is Jay from A Stitch in Time in Bemidji, Minnesota, back for another lesson on the Brother BES software, where we're going to be talking about the basics of underlay, push-pull compensation, and why we save in certain formats and for our designs. So when you look at a design like this, what you see is only the top layer of stitching, but so many times there is other stitching underneath it that makes a huge difference about whether this works and turns out in the long run. And that is called underlay. And so if you were to start playing this, you can see, I'm going to speed this up here just a little bit. It starts by doing these big lines going vertically, but then when it actually goes to start filling in it, it's going to fill it in horizontally. So what's happening? Why is it doing this? The reason for this is that whenever you have a whole bunch of threads pulling in one direction, that is where it's going to try and compress the material here. Well, in order for material to compress and stretch, when it compresses here, it's going to try and push out on here. And obviously these threads are going left and right, and so it's going to be trying to compress in here and push out on the vertical. And so by adding some vertical stitches in here, it helps secure that whole area to the stabilizer and pull into the middle here while pushing out on the left and right edges. Then when it comes and does the top stitching, it's going to be pulling in left and right and trying to push out. And so these stitches work against each other, and it really helps make the design work flat. And so there's several different ways of underlay that you can use, and a lot of it's going to depend on how dense your design is or not. So I'm just going to go into here. I'm going to click on, this is just a emoticon that's in the power pack for Brother BES4. I'm going to click on the yellow on the left up here, and at the top you're going to see the areas where the fill stitch is, and we talked about that some in a prior lesson. But underneath it is one we oftentimes just ignore, and this is called underlay. And so right now you can see that the one that is checked is a perpendicular. It means so that the gray stitches in the background, which is fill, we're going to put some alternating in the middle for perpendicular, and that's why you saw the underlay going vertical while the fill was going horizontal. If I uncheck that and then put contour, what is contour? Contour is just simply a base stitch out around the outside edge to hold that in place. Now, this should always be turned on when you're working with something that has a lot of body, like a thick sweatshirt, like a thick jacket, or a something that's got, like we saw in one question online, that Sherpa fake wool lining on the inside. Because what happens is if you don't secure the edges, you can actually have the material kind of fold over, and all your outlines and everything are going to be off, and it's going to frustrate you to no end. So that's contour. There's full lattice, and so it's recognizing that there's going to be pull from various different directions, so why not have a whole bunch going 45 degrees this way and a whole bunch more going 45 degrees this way. The other is parallel, and this is where you're going to go in the same direction as the line, as the original lines, just a little bit farther apart. And this is great if you're doing text or something like that, where you just want to secure the material down before it goes back and does the satin stitch over top of it. You don't want it shifting. This is if you're floating a fabric. You don't actually have it in the hoop. You just hoop up the stabilizer and make it sticky, and then press the material down onto it, like a dog collar or stuff like that. You might want to run this one first because it's going to anchor the material fast to the stabilizer before it does the stitching. And the other is a zigzag, and that's similar to the lattice. It's just that it's not quite as intense as that one. And then there is the full lattice, and then there's the lattice, which is halfway. And so the thing is, you can do several of these. Like if I'm doing something that is quite, I got a lot of body, got a lot of poof to my embroidery material, I definitely want that contour turned on there. But yet it's a significant amount of pull, and so I'm going to turn on perpendicular. And now I also can change down below here how dense I want these. Like the stitch length is currently 3.8 millimeters. That's a fairly long stitch length. It doesn't add a lot of stitches to your design, but it will still achieve the same result of the push-pull compensation. And then the inset. And this is how far in from the edge do I want this design, and right now it's at 4/10 of an inch. And so we can change all these things. I can turn on both of these and then click apply. And if you look right now, my stitches are 2,759. I click apply. It goes to 2,799 because it added that circumference there. The other thing is that you can deal with here is called the push-pull compensation. And basically, it's when you stitch something out and you notice that everything is 1 millimeter of an inch off. It's shifting 1 millimeter where it's pulling in here, and so this last border around the edge, it's about 1 millimeter off. Half a millimeter here, half a millimeter here. And so what you can do is you can say, this is, I'm going to use absolute. I'm going to change this. How far is it off? We're going to put 1.0 millimeters. And what will happen is when we apply that, it adds more fill stitches in that underlay to make it pull tighter in the underlay so that your baseline is better. But that's after you have already done something and you figure you can actually get a measurement on it. This is how far it is off. But the other thing you can also do is just a percentage. So if you're doing a 6-inch design, you might say, I want to do 1.5%. And or 1.1% or 110, which would be 10% extra, and that's probably going to be a little high in this type of realm. But according to here, that is about the percentage. 1 millimeter is about the percentage there as well. So this is where you can work with it. I generally work with absolutes a little more because I can measure that, and it works well for me. Now, one thing to note, though, is that when we're working with BES4, this is just a design that was created inside of here. And you can do the same thing with text and font. I'm going to show that here in a little bit. But what happens when you work with a design that did not come from the BES software? When you save a BES4 program in the BRF format, it saves all the shapes, all the underlay, all the colors, all the travel stitches, all the cut stitches. It saves all that data, but it can only be read by the BES4 software. So, and your machine cannot read it. So when you save it as a stitch file, it converts all those things to simply stitch placements. So it knows that it's going to be doing the green, it's going to do stitch, 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 and it gives all the X, Y coordinates, and it just simply runs from one pattern to the next like a path and stitching it out. It has no concept of whether this is a satin stitch or a fill stitch. Satin stitch, fill stitch. It doesn't know. It just simply knows that there are stitches in these places, and it goes and does them. So thus, when I go over here and look at this design that came from another company, when I click here, notice I have none of those underlay abilities here. And the reason is it doesn't have that data included with the file. So it's always important when you're digitizing something, when you're creating something from scratch, and you're not sure if you're going to have to come back and tweak it or not, always, always, always save it in the BRF format so that you can come back and you can change this to fix the issue. It's the same thing goes with all the other software, Floriani, Brother, Janome, Viking. Always save it in the software's native format, and you'll be able to come back and tweak this. Because if I go over to here and I add a text to the bottom, and I just simply go Teddy, and now if you look at this, I can scroll over here to the right, and there's my fill, and then underneath it is my underlay. And most of the times we've gotten so used to this that we don't even look at these things anymore. But this is where it automatically put that in there, but I can tweak this depending on how it turns out. So I hope that helps explain a little bit of the mystery of underlay and push-pull compensation. I would like to give one plug to a different manufacturer in this video. If you ever get a chance to go to the Floriani training on their software, they do a tremendously good job of explaining how to do push-pull compensation and how to visualize these things. I learned tremendously from them even after I've been digitizing for quite a number of years. Lots of different programs have the similar tools. You don't have to necessarily buy the software, but the techniques and the training of which they do is fabulous. So hope this was helpful, and talk to you later on the next video.